Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we analyze fascinating topics and break them down. Today we're going to take a deep dive into Roald Dahl's short story, Lamb to the Slaughter. We'll be exploring the story, the characters, their motivations, and all the literary techniques that make this story so memorable. Now, before we get into the analysis, let's do a quick plot summary. The story starts with Mary Maloney, a devoted housewife anxiously awaiting her husband Patrick's return from work. Everything seems perfectly normal. Mary's happy at home. But as the evening goes on, Patrick starts acting strangely. He's distant, he's quiet, and seems like something's weighing on his mind. The tension keeps building and building until he finally makes a really shocking announcement to Mary. And Dahl is very clever here. He never actually tells us what Patrick says. Now, this is a turning point in the story. Mary completely snaps. In a moment of rage, she grabs a frozen leg of lamb from the freezer and kills Patrick. It happens so fast. This sudden shift from a loving wife to a cold-blooded killer. It's really jarring, and it makes you rethink your whole perception of Mary.
But the story doesn't stop there. Mary, in a surprisingly calm and collected way, starts to cover up her crime. She comes up with this alibi. She goes to the grocery store, talks to the grocer Sam to really make her story believable. Then she goes back home, pretends to be shocked and heartbroken, and calls the police to report the murder. And she is utterly convincing. The police officers, who are actually some of Patrick's close friends, don't even suspect her for a second. And this is where the story takes this really dark and humorous turn. Mary serves the very same leg of lamb now cooked to the unsuspecting policeman. They literally eat the murder weapon completely clueless, and the story ends with the officers talking about the missing murder weapon while Mary's in the other room holding back laughter. So that's the plot in a nutshell. But what makes Lamb to the Slaughter so captivating isn't just the crime itself. It's how Dahl uses it to explore themes of betrayal, deception, and the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of ordinary lives. One of the things that really jumps out in this story is Mary's transformation. At first, she's the classic dutiful housewife, totally dedicated to her husband and her home.
But as soon as Patrick makes that announcement, something in her changes. This sudden shift from passive to violent, it's shocking, and it makes you question everything you thought you knew about her. And remember how I mentioned that Dahl never reveals what Patrick actually said? That's really important because it lets us as readers imagine what could possibly be so terrible that it would trigger such a violent reaction. It also shows how subjective reality can be and how one event can be seen in totally different ways. Now, you might be thinking, is Mary a victim or is she a villain? Is she driven by righteous anger or just cold calculation? The story doesn't give you easy answers. What she did is horrible. There's no doubt about that. But there's a strange logic to it. She's protecting herself, her unborn child, her future. Dahl really blurs the lines between victim and perpetrator, and he makes us question our own ideas about guilt and innocence. Another thing that makes this story so interesting is the irony. Just look at the title Lamb to the Slaughter. It's the double meaning. It refers to the actual leg of lamb and also to Mary's supposed innocence. The lamb usually represents purity and sacrifice, but here it becomes a weapon of violence, which shows how appearances can be so deceiving. And then there's that scene with the police officers eating the murder weapon. It's dark humor at its finest. It adds this absurd element to the story, but it also subtly criticizes the justice system. It shows how even experienced professionals can be fooled and how easily we can miss the truth. Dahl also plays with dramatic irony throughout the story. We, the readers, know things that the characters don't, which builds suspense and anticipation. We see Mary creating her alibi, knowing the whole truth about her deception. It's this tension that makes us complicit in her plan, even though we're horrified by what she did. But there's even more to this story than meets the eye. Lamb to the Slaughter is also a commentary on society's expectations and the roles women are expected to play. Mary's stuck in this domestic world, right? At first, she seems passive and obedient, but when she's pushed too far, she shows a cunning side that you don't see coming. It's like she uses her perceived weakness as a strength. She manipulates the police, plays the perfect grieving widow. She's using their own assumptions about how women should act against them. So in a way, she's exploiting the very system that's trying to control her. It makes you think. Now, some people might say that Mary's actions are understandable. She's desperate. She doesn't have many options in this patriarchal society. Others might see her as a cold-hearted killer who's just using manipulation to escape justice. What's brilliant about Dahl's writing is that he doesn't give us a clear-cut answer. He wants us to struggle with the moral dilemma of the situation, to confront our own biases about guilt and innocence. But beyond the themes of deception and social commentary, Lamb to the Slaughter also explores this unsettling idea that darkness can exist right under the surface of everyday life. The story takes place in this normal setting, a cozy home, a loving wife, a seemingly peaceful evening. But then Patrick arrives, and everything changes. This contrast between the ordinary and the horrifying is what makes this story so chilling. It reminds us that darkness can be hiding anywhere. Even the people closest to us can have secrets and be capable of things we'd never imagine. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that the world might not be as safe and stable as we think. And Dahl is a master of suspense. He keeps us on the edge of our seats even though we know what's going to happen. He does this through the pacing, the language, the way he foreshadows events. From the second Patrick walks in acting weird, we know something's wrong. The tension builds and builds until he finally makes that announcement. And even after the murder, the suspense doesn't let up. We watch Mary carefully build her alibi, constantly worried that she'll get caught. The police arrive at the interrogation, that scene where the officers eat the murder weapon. It all keeps us hooked until the very end. Now let's talk about Dahl's writing style. It's simple, direct, but incredibly effective. He doesn't use a lot of fancy language. Instead, he focuses on creating vivid images and conveying raw emotion. The way he describes the murder, for example. It's stark and brutal. But then he also has these moments of lyrical beauty, especially when he's describing Mary's home life. This contrast between the beautiful and the horrific makes the story even more powerful. Lamb to the Slaughter is a masterclass in storytelling. It's a chilling tale that stays with you long after you've finished reading. It can be enjoyed on so many levels. As a thriller, as a psychological study, as a commentary on society and gender roles. So what can we take away from all this? Lamb to the Slaughter gives us a lot to think about. It shows us the human mind, how complex our society is. And it reminds us that things aren't always what they seem. Justice isn't always served, and sometimes the most ordinary people can do the most extraordinary things. But maybe the biggest takeaway is the power of perspective, how we see things, how we judge people, how we tell our own stories. All of that is shaped by our own experiences and our own point of view. Mary's actions, as awful as they are, you can kind of understand them when you see how desperate she was and the limited choices she felt she had in this male-dominated society. The police officers, they were blinded by their own assumptions. They missed the truth, even though it was right in front of them. And us as readers were left with this unsettling feeling that maybe there isn't one single truth. Maybe there's just a lot of different perspectives, all shaped by our own biases and beliefs. So as you think about Lamb to the Slaughter, I want you to consider a few things. How does society influence what people do? What are the limits of deception? How far would you go to protect yourself or the people you love? And maybe the most important question, how does Dahl's writing make you question your own ideas about guilt, innocence, and what truth really is? That wraps up our deep dive into Roald Dahl's Lamb to the Slaughter. I hope you enjoyed this exploration and that it gave you some new insights into this amazing story. Until next time, keep diving.